Welcome back to Men and the City. Coming at you today from Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the river, as you can see behind me, from Manhattan. What a beautiful day indeed. It's about 60 degrees. So I thought it would be the perfect backdrop to discuss masculinity. And in this video, we're going to talk about becoming the wolf. One of my favorite films, I don't know, most of you probably have not heard of it. It's fairly obscure, and I don't think it did all that well in the box office, but it was released in 1994. It's called Wolf, and it stars Jack Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, James Spader, Christopher Plummer, a lot of great actors, very good script, and a very interesting film, a film that is really not about werewolves, thank God. That's a subject like vampire that I think has had its day and it's long past. In any case, Wolf was a quite different film. And for my money, I think it has a lot more to do with masculinity than anything else. So what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about the film as it pertains to masculinity today. And it, I think, will be quite relatable for a lot of you watching, especially those of you that have had a fairly difficult spat over the last 5, 10, even 20 years. Because it's my view, as most of you know, that I think your luck is about to change. So what's going on in Wolf? What is that film really about? Well, the beginning of the film is interesting. Jack Nicholson is on a trip up to Vermont, and he hits an animal, or at least what he thinks is an animal, gets out to examine the body, thinks it's dead, and of course, it turns out to be a wolf, and it bites him. And that catalyzes a transformation, or the beginning of a transformation. Now, as is the case with most of these films, he becomes a werewolf, and you know the rest of the story. But that's not really what happens in Wolf. In Wolf, this broken down man, he's about 60 in the film, he's being squeezed out of his position by a younger man, played very well by a conniving and manipulative James Spader, who incidentally is sleeping with Jack Nicholson's wife. So in addition to losing his job and being cuckolded, of course he doesn't find out about that until later, Jack Nicholson is a defeated person. He basically thinks that his life is over, that he's going to take a new job that he won't like, that will take him away from his current position, that of senior editor at a well-respected publishing house. But the billionaire who owns the business has no respect for him, thinks he's weak, thinks he's doesn't have the balls, the courage to keep his job or potentially get promoted. Well, in the course of this film, because he's bitten, all of a sudden things begin to change. It's not just that he experiences physical changes. Obviously, he has heightened senses and he feels more physically robust, you know, all of the cliches. But more importantly, he regains a sense of vitality as a man. In other words, his entire outlook changes. And instead of accepting defeat, or instead of more or less accepting the dominance of James Spader's character, he begins to fight back. And does so in a rather aggressive fashion. Obviously, it's a horror film, so there's collateral damage and violence and all the rest of it. But he begins to mark his territory, and he begins to change behavior. He begins to take action that nobody would think he would take. And this alarms him. He feels, understandably, rather befuddled and frightened of the capacity within him. And so he seeks out a wise man, a man in the film they call Dr. Alaz, but he's effectively a philosopher or a professor of religion, something like that. And so he seeks this man out to potentially understand what has happened to him, because he doesn't believe it himself. He's in a state of denial to some degree. So I just wanted to read a few of the lines from Alaz because I think it's particularly apropos for men today in this very emasculated time. So listen to what he says here. Jack Nicholson goes to him, gives him the basic scenario, and this is what he has to say. So Alaz says, we must remember that man has only been out of the jungle for 25,000 years. Life is mystical. It's just that we're used to it. And then he tells him some of the rules of the wolf. He says, the wolf rests by day and prowls by night, but is always present, that he grows inside a man he's entered until the first full moon. And then he consumes him, killing all but his nature and his heart. But of course, not all who are bitten change. There must be something wild within, an analog of the wolf. And then Nicholson responds, as you might expect him to respond. He says, well, that lets me out. Among my people, I'm known as the guy least likely to have an analog of the wolf. And then Alaz says, your people are wrong, Mr. Randall. That's Jack Nicholson. And he says, sometimes one doesn't even need to be bitten. Only the passion of the wolf is enough. And then Nicholson asks for a prognosis, and he says, not that I subscribe to any of this. And then Alaz says, neither do I really, only to the possibility. The demon wolf is not evil unless the man he's bitten is evil, and it feels good to be a wolf, doesn't it? Power without guilt, love without doubt. And then he finishes with this thought. He says, if you decide to believe, perhaps you will give me your gift. It has been a privilege. I've never seen one like you. A couple things I want to key in on for us today. The first is this idea of mysticism. Life for modern men in particular is not mystical. It's very dreary, it's full of drudgery, it's monotony, it's 9 to 5, rinse and repeat. And this in and of itself has a very emasculating effect, because part of the masculine psyche or the masculine core is dealing with dynamic change. It's dealing with hardship. It's confronting terrible things. And modern life, to some degree, or the modern world as we live it, especially for those of us that are living in the developing world, but it's not exclusive to the developing world either. Depending on where you live, especially for men in the city, it's a very fabricated, manufactured, and curated experience, isn't it? But that's not life. That's not reality. Life is mystical. It's spiritual. It's dynamic. It has layers. And so the first principle to convey here for those of you watching is that what Alaz is trying to get Nicholson's character to understand is that what you think you are in this controlled environment is not really who you are. You are, in fact, a wolf. It's just that this experience, this event, all of a sudden activated it. That's the first principle. The second is this idea of possibility. So a lot of men today, especially the most well-informed, tend to be extremely negative, defeated, black-pilled, the doomers, if you will. And one can understand why they feel that way, because to them, the idea of change, the possibility that these things could resurface, even the idea of masculinity itself, or the idea of justice, perhaps, or normalcy, or reversion to the mean, as I've talked about it, seems impossible. And yet, in my view, it's happening. It's underway. This transformation has already begun. But to some degree, in order for that transformation to occur, not just collectively, but individually in ourselves, we have to be open to the possibility that such things can happen. You have to be open to the possibility. For those of you that have been in a rut, that have had a rough go of it over the last 10 or 20 years, maybe you've been unemployed, maybe you lost your job, maybe you've been divorced, whatever, but life hasn't necessarily gone your way. You have to stay open to the possibility that things can change, and change very quickly, and that the wolf inside of you can be reactivated. And I know that it's hard, it's not easy, but it's there. It's still there. It's who you really are as well. It's not this shadow figure that Peterson and others talk about, this darkness in some kind of depth psychology deep beneath. It's who you really are. It's the wolf that needs to come out. The third piece of this, and the final note on this subject, is what Nicholson conveys to Alaz when he says, I'm the least likely to be the wolf or to become the wolf. My people have written me off, effectively, is what he says. I think much of that characterizes men today. They've been written off. They've been so emasculated that there is an assumption, particularly by those in power, that they know exactly what people will or will not do. And that is a false assumption. That's a very dangerous assumption, especially when society as a whole is bitten. Metaphorically speaking, if things start to fly off the handle, if all of a sudden prosperity is arrested and scarcity emerges, then what people are going to do becomes very unpredictable. It becomes mystical. And that is the world that we're headed back into. And so for those of you that have had a difficult time, perhaps society's wrong about you. I think society's wrong about men. I don't think our time is finished. I don't think the future is female. I think that we're on the cusp of this reactivation of the wolf in all of us. And what exactly that looks like is anybody's bet. Because we're not living in a linear time anymore. We're living in a time of mysticism, a time of dynamic change, a time of spiritualism. And that will reactivate masculinity, won't it? So in a sense, neo-masculinity, as I call it, is not neo at all. It's just a resurgence. It's a revitalization of the wolf in all of us. And remember that the collective wolf carries quite a bite. So, become the wolf, gentlemen. Remember who it is that you really are. Reactivate that intuitive sense within you. Do the things that other people don't think you will or are capable of. Don't apologize for it. And bite back at life when it bites you. Stay tuned for more, and we'll talk soon.